Hey everyone, it's Bernie Carmona, and welcome back to PS Weekly, the sound of the New York City school system. I was a reporter during season 1, back when I was a junior at Beacon High School, and now I'm a senior. Senior year has been a lot, but I'm so excited to be back on the show. We're kicking off season 2 with our very first episode, and if you've been with us since season 1, thank you so much for sticking around. PS Weekly is a podcast where student reporters dive into the biggest issues facing New York City public schools. But we tell these stories from our point of view. This season, we're taking it even further. But before we get into those stories, we have a special episode for you to kick off the season. Because I and some of my fellow PS Weekly reporters from season 1 were invited to this year's South by Southwest EDU for a panel discussion about inequities in New York City's high school system. So today, we're sharing that live recorded panel discussion where you'll hear from me, Salma Baksh, and Marcellino Melika, along with Alex Zimmerman, our reporter from Chalkbeat New York. And we really tackle everything from the complicated high school admissions process to the disparities in resources and opportunities between schools. We'll share what it's really like to navigate the largest school system in the country, and what we'd change if we were in charge. Plus, we'll discuss why student voices need to be part of the conversation when decisions about our education are made. And this is just the beginning. This season, we've got in-depth investigations and conversations about the challenges students, teachers, and administrators are facing in this new political climate, told by students who know what it's really like. So, make sure you subscribe to PS Weekly wherever you get your podcast. Alright, let's dive in. Here's our live panel from South by Southwest EDU.
Welcome to PS Weekly, the sound of the New York City school system. My name is Salma Baksh, and I'm a student reporter with The Bell. We're super excited to be with you here today for our live recorded episode of PS Weekly. PS Weekly is a podcast where student reporters explore pressing issues in the New York City school system. It's a collaboration between The Bell and Chalkbeat New York. The Bell is a nonprofit that is training the next generation of journalists by offering paid reporting internships and advocating for equitable access to youth journalism opportunities. Along with PS Weekly, we also produce the Miseducation podcast and release episodes from our Summer Youth Podcast Academy. Chalkbeat is a nonprofit news organization that covers efforts to improve schools for all students, especially those who have historically lacked access to a quality education. I'm joined today by my fellow student reporters, Marcellino Melika and Bernie Carmona, as well as Chalkbeat reporter, Alex Zimmerman. Can you guys introduce yourselves, as well as the first story you ever reported?
Hi guys, thank you for joining us. My name is Marcellino Melika. I'm a senior at Francis Lewis High School in Queens, New York. I first joined The Bell the summer after my sophomore year, and I've also worked with organizations like WNYC through their Radio's Rookies program, and of course, my school's new paper. My first story was on the imbalance between boy and girl sports teams at my school.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for making it. My name is Bernie Carmona. I'm from the Bronx, New York, but I go to high school as a senior at Beacon High School in Midtown Manhattan. I've been a student reporter with The Bell since my sophomore year of high school, but since my junior year, I've also been a student photographer at the Bronx Documentary Center. And the first story I ever reported was about funding inequities in arts education across New York City public schools.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Zimmerman. I'm a reporter at Chalkbeat New York, where I've been covering New York City public schools for almost a decade. Before that, I was a reporter at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Pittsburgh City Paper, which is the city's alt-weekly. I wish I could say that the first story I reported was like an awesome, hard-hitting investigation into inequities in public education, but it was actually about, a profile of a horse breeder in suburban Pittsburgh.
And back to me. Hi, I'm Salma. I'm a current first-year student at Smith College, hoping to study government and sociology, but I recently graduated from Forest Hills High School in Queens, New York. I've joined the Bell in my senior year, though I wish I joined earlier. I've also reported for City Limits through their Clarify internship, and I played a role in restarting my school paper, The Beacon, which is actually what my first story is about, that process of restarting and why the paper left my school in the first place. To start, I would like to engage you guys and poll you on a question. I want you to guess, how many students do you think right now attend New York City public schools? And we have a multiple choice, so it's easy. This is by a show of hands. I'll go A, B, C, and D. I want you to raise your hand if you think A, 1 million students attend New York City public schools. Whoa, okay, that's a lot of you guys. It makes me think you guys know something. Okay, B, 500,000? No one? Okay. C, 100,000? Also no one. You guys are really confident on a million. Or D, 10,000? Okay, also no one. So the answer is A. You guys are really smart, and I'm thinking you guys are already invested in New York City education, which excites me. 1 million students attend New York City public schools. It is the largest school system in the nation. And if you do the math, that means about 1 in 340 Americans attend New York City public schools, which is kind of crazy. The New York City public school system operates 1,800 schools across all 5 boroughs: the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island. And this includes traditional public schools as well as charter schools. For the 2023 to 2024 school year, 42% of New York City students identified as Hispanic or Latinx, which makes it the largest proportion. This is followed by 20% of students identifying as Black, 19% as Asian, and 16% as white. Attending New York City public schools has been a special experience. Taking the subway, grabbing a bacon, egg, and cheese before school, running to an internship on Wall Street after class. But this hasn't come without its challenges. For this live recorded episode of PS Weekly, we'll be diving into the inequities that we see in our New York City high schools. We'll explain the New York City high school admissions process and how that feeds into a number of other disparities. And then we'll present solutions, what we would do if we were in positions of power and change things. So, in order to understand the inequities in New York City high schools, it's really important to understand how the admissions process works, because this is how students are sorted into high schools. To start off, can you tell us about your high school application process, Marcel?
For sure. So I attended PSIS 119, which was a middle school in Queens, New York. I wanted to attend Hunter College High School, but my family couldn't really afford the fee for their special admissions test. So I was set up to take the Specialized High School Admissions Test, or the SHSAT.
For members who don't know what that is, can you explain the SHSAT?
Definitely. So the SHSAT is the admissions test to gain entry into these top specialized public schools in New York City. There's some of the best public schools in the city and even nationwide. You're thinking about names like Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech, and some kids spend years preparing for this test. So then it was my turn to take that test. And the only really resource I had to prepare was this program called DREAM. It was a city-run and funded program to help give prep for the SHSAT. And in hindsight, that program didn't adequately prepare me for the test. Like, we never even took a full practice test for that program, which is crazy. So then it was my time to actually take the SAT. I took it, and I bombed it. I didn't make the cutoff for any of the specialized schools. And on top of that, I only made my 7th choice high school out of my non-specialized choices, Francis Lewis High School, which was 7 miles away. I'm glad with how things ended up. I love the school. It's a really big school with a lot of programs and opportunities, so I'm really glad with how things went later on. But in the moment, I was not very happy with how things ended up.
Mm-hmm. You say 7 miles. Can you tell us, how long does that take?
Yeah, so New York City public transit is pretty nice, but even then I still have to take 3 buses. That takes me about an hour and a half. I wake up 4:30 a.m. to have like more than enough time to get ready.
Crazy.
So yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I also got into my 7th choice of high school, and I freaked out. I remember distinctly I was on FaceTime with my best friend, and I was crying because I thought I got into a quote-unquote bad school. But I also, just like you, found a lot of opportunities at my high school, and it turned out okay. Bernie, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think I got pretty lucky throughout the process. I ended up getting into my first choice, but I specifically remember the stress it took to apply to high schools in 7th grade. Like, that's the year where your grades are the most important, and if you don't academically excel, then you won't, quote unquote, get into a bad school.
Well, Alex, as a Chalkbeat reporter, you report on the New York City school system every day. Can you tell us a little bit about how the admissions process works?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you all probably have just gotten a little bit of a flavor of this, right? Like, they're talking about ranking choices, they're talking about having to travel long distances in some cases. It is a really, really complex process. So I'm going to do my best to give you just a very high-level rundown of how it works. So in most places, like where you go to high school is pretty simple. It's based on where you live, you're zoned for a school, and you go to that school. In New York City, there's a really unusual degree of school choice. So in theory, students can apply to any high school in the city, and there are more than 400 of them. And the way that they get matched to a school is they list in order of preference which high school you want to go to. You used to only be able to list 12 choices. Now you can theoretically list all 400. So again, just really enormous amounts of research that some people put into figuring out which schools to rank. And then once you've listed those schools on your application, there's a really fancy algorithm that someone actually won the Nobel Prize for that matches you with one of those choices. So each student, once that algorithm is run, gets spit out with one choice that they got matched with, and generally speaking, that's where students go. The system is really designed to like open up possibilities for students. So a lot of different schools have like different themes. Some are sort of arts schools, some have more sort of like science offerings. Like, there's just a really diverse set of programs that students can choose from. So if the school that happens to be closest to where you live doesn't offer the kind of programs you want, or you think it just isn't up to par, like isn't offering like academics that feel like solid to you, you're not stuck at that school. Like, you can apply somewhere else. So the sort of theory behind it is that it opens up, that it creates like a lot of promise for students. But I think, as we're going to talk about in a moment, like that system also helps cement inequities. And you know, in some ways it's a false promise, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But yeah, that's sort of like the theory behind the choice system in New York City.
Right. And to give some context to those inequities, the UCLA Civil Rights Project did a report that found that New York City schools are among the most segregated in the nation. Almost half of New York City public schools are intensely segregated, meaning that 90% or more of their population is Black and Hispanic. Meanwhile, half of all white students in the city are concentrated into just 8% of schools. Alex, can you explain the connection between our current admissions process and this segregation?
Yeah, so one really important piece of that to understand is that there are sort of two main buckets of types of school in New York City high schools. There are screen schools that take sort of your prior academic record into account. So these are schools that can look at you know, your GPA. In some cases, they might require an audition. For a smaller subset of screen schools, they can even like ask you to do supplemental essays, or can even ask you to do an interview. And then there's another group of schools that are predominantly unscreened, which means they're not taking your prior academic background into account. For the screen schools, the most important thing by far is your 7th grade GPA and core subjects. So these are students who are like, in some cases 12, 13 years old. And you know, I'd love to throw this back to you all in terms of like what it was like when you were in 7th grade, knowing that if you wanted a shot at a screen school, like that was the year that really mattered for you.
Yeah, for sure. I remember like being told back then by teachers like, oh, like your 7th grade GPA is gonna matter. Like, you have to like really focus on your classes this year. I don't know, I guess I didn't really like internalize that. I felt like it was that sort of thing teachers told you just to like get you to like get in shape. Like, sort of like teachers were like, oh, next year, like the teachers, they'll be like way more strict. Like, this behavior isn't gonna fly, and then it's like the exact opposite. I felt like it was that type of thing where like it wasn't really the truth, and it definitely was. And I feel like it's a lot of like pressure to put on like middle school students. you shouldn't expect them to plan that far ahead. Even like planning that far ahead for a thing like college and high school is already like a lot of pressure for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. I remember specifically internalizing the idea of there being good and bad schools. So at Beacon, the school I applied to, my first choice, there was an essay requirement, and writing that essay was really hard for an eighth grader, me, but I think at the time, I had a lot of teachers telling me that if I didn't academically excel or didn't do good during my seventh grade year, that I would end up at the zone school down the street. Instead of a good school, it's a screen school that would offer me all of these opportunities, you know.
So we've talked about GPA, but I'd like to throw it back to you, Alex, to talk about some other factors that are contributing to segregation.
Yeah, so if you think kind of about seventh grade GPA being kind of the most important thing for getting into screen schools, like if you just had like a regular like random distribution of students across the spectrum of GPAs, then you might expect the screen schools to look pretty similar to the unscreened schools. But of course that like isn't a random distribution, right? So if you're looking at like other factors that kind of correlate with a student's GPA, if you look at like sort of the top echelon of GPAs in New York City public schools among seventh graders, that is a group of students that is way less likely to be Black or Latino, way less likely to be a student with a disability, way less likely to be a student who's learning English, way less likely to be a student who's living in temporary housing. So this sort of the way this works in practice is that the screen schools end up draining off like a really high percentage of kids who are on grade level and have high GPAs and are considered proficient in reading and math on the state tests, and end up being schools that are not at all representative of New York City public schools as a whole. And sort of, you know, some of the students here have talked a little bit about like other groups of screen schools in New York City. So one of the most famous examples of that are the specialized schools, and they actually don't really participate in this other kind of like seventh grade GPA process. Admissions to those schools is determined by a single test, which Marcel mentioned a second ago, the SHSAT. It truly doesn't matter how well or poorly you did in seventh grade for those schools. All that matters is your score on this one exam, and that's actually like enshrined in state law. And so those schools are even less representative than the other group of screen schools. So you have kind of in New York City like a few different tiers of screening happening, but in general, what this looks like is the screen schools tend to be much whiter, tend to be much more Asian American, tend to have more middle class families, and the unscreened schools tend to have more Black and Latino kids, more students with disabilities, and just are generally serving like higher need populations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm wondering, you know, now that we've described what screen schools look like, what do unscreened schools look like?
Yeah, and I think like up to this point I've been talking a little bit about kind of like the demographic differences between those schools, and sort of like a traditional like racial segregation, economic segregation kind of way. But I think another dimension of that that's really important to think about is like academic segregation, right? So you're not just concentrating students of different demographic groups, you're also concentrating students of different academic abilities at different schools. And so that also has like there are screen schools in New York City that are predominantly students of color. And you know, so it doesn't totally neatly map on to demographics, but there are, in general, like the screen schools are draining off like a lot of the students who are stronger performers academically. And so that also just has like a really profound effect on like what kind of academic programs schools are offering and like what school culture is like. And so yeah, I want you to just keep a kernel of that idea in your head as we move forward, that like when we're talking about segregation, we're not just talking about like racial demographics and socioeconomic status, we're also talking about like what students' academic backgrounds look like.
I'm wondering, have you guys felt the impacts of academic or racial segregation in your high schools?
I went to a middle school in the South Bronx, and that school was predominantly Hispanic and Black students. And then transitioning from that school to Beacon High School is 35% white. And when I went into that school, I remember getting the biggest culture shock ever. It was like a shot of imposter syndrome that I had never had before, because I was just bombarded with a lot of extracurriculars and a lot of options, I'd say. Options to explore music, options to explore film, dance, theater. We had an arts rotation in freshman year that let us explore all of the arts at Beacon High School throughout our freshman year. So I think not having that in middle school really was a stressful move, but I think it introduced me to a lot more opportunities and allowed me to hone in on journalism, because that was an issue that I pretty much noticed throughout all my 4 years.
Yeah, for sure. I remember like in my middle school, there was like 2 Asian people in my entire like class, and then going to my high school, Francis Lewis, it's about like 50% Asian, so it was a big demographic difference. And alongside, like similar to Bernry's story as well, my middle school had no opportunities. We had no extracurriculars or whatever. It was just straight up classes. Transitioning to high school, there was all these different programs, opportunities, and it really like allowed me to like shine as a person and sort of like develop my like intellectual curiosity, and like even like within like my personal life as well. Like I joined the Science Research Academy. I'm a published scientist now. I'm doing a lot of different research. I joined the string orchestra, and now I play the cello. That's an instrument I want to keep playing throughout like college and the rest of my life. And most importantly, I also joined my school's journalism academy, and that's like what started all of this for me. So I feel like it was a massive contrast, both academically and racially, from middle school to high school. So. Yeah.
So the experiences you guys are talking about reminds me of some reporting that Bernie did, actually, and we have a clip of it.
Yeah, during my first year with the Miseducation podcast, I created an episode called The Price of Creativity. And in this short clip, I'm interviewing my friend Katie. She's basically describing what her transition from middle school to high school was like, and the differences she noticed in her creative interests.
I did play basketball, since that was literally the only sport that my school had, since they didn't have like much funding. And the extracurriculars at my middle school, you had to pay to do them. And my family does not have enough money to like continuously keep paying for me to do something after school.
Those barriers don't exist at Beacon. Beacon High School provides access to 96 clubs and 20 PSAL sports teams. Beacon's implementation of a freshman arts rotation allows students to explore multiple electives in a single semester. This gave Katie the chance to choose her main elective in 10th grade, which was filmmaking.
It does have like places and teachers that let you like dabble into it, you know? Like if I wanted to do film as like my career for my whole life, Beacon gives me the access to, by having like film classes, by having like advanced film classes, by having like teachers who could like help me go to like good colleges that are like made for filmmaking.
Yeah, so I definitely feel like Katie's experience was a shared one. I specifically remember, like, during the tour of Beacon High School, we went to the cellar where our music department is located, and I was just looking at all the 10 studios in a row. It's like there are 10 huge studios, and they just have a bunch of audio equipment, Logic Pro X, GarageBand, and pianos and guitars. And I was just so invested in, pursuing music. And eventually I, started taking the lessons, but I would have never done that if I hadn't even done the research to apply to Beacon High School. So I think going back to Katie's experience, talking to her was just so rejuvenating, because she had that experience of not going to a school with a lot of opportunities, and despite there being funding for her school, I think had to use that money to support the students in other factors, like giving them resources of food and shelter, because Katie's school was located in an underfunded community, and those funds don't always go towards creative endeavors.
I definitely have noticed something similar with high school journalism opportunities, as ironic as it is for us to be here today. I believe the statistics go that among the 50 high schools with the highest percentage of white students, 76% have a student newspaper. And if you look at the counterpart of the 50 high schools with the highest concentration of black students, That number is only 8%. And it's a huge, huge gap that advocacy groups have been trying to disrupt. But I think it speaks to the fact that if you go to a wider school, you are getting better opportunities. I can acknowledge the fact that I went to a bigger school and my school newspaper restarted when I got there. But we had thousands of students, and that's what we had the funding to do. Bigger schools, often like Marcel School has, 5,000 students, right, around that amount. A huge school with a lot of money. And it creates experiences between high schools that are completely different.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I remember, like, my friends who ended up at our zone school, Grover Cleveland, it's majority Hispanic. And I remember, like, talking to them about, like, our different experiences and, like, their experiences. And it's a school that I would have rather not ended up at. It's just because, like, of the different opportunities they have compared to Francis Lewis. They're a lot more lacking. And it's sort of, like, starting to think about how, like, different my high school journey would have been if I ended up at my zone school and hadn't, like, applied to, like, literally randomly apply to high schools. Like, I remember in middle school, I was so clueless as to what high schools to apply to. I literally pulled up the U.S. News site and sorted by high schools, which is crazy because people do that for, like, colleges, which is already, like, not a good way to pick. But doing that for high schools is, like, it's a bit early to be pulling out U.S. News, definitely. But I did that, and I literally picked schools about, like, the vibe of their name. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a student at Francis Lewis High School. That sounded decent. I was like, or I'm gonna be a student at the I School. That's like, that sounded like a weird school. I don't know. So that's actually how I picked my high school, and sort of like startling to think how, like, I'm sure other people have, like, maybe not the same experience, but, like, similar experiences where, like, they were absolutely clueless when picking the high schools, and it really has an impact. You know, like, the demographics are there, the opportunities are there, like, all the stats show that it's a fundamentally different experience if you go to a different school. So,
Alex, can you explain a bit more about why these resource disparities exist?
Yeah, for sure. So there are, as you can imagine, like, a lot of different kind of interrelated reasons for this, and I can't cover all of them, but I'm going to try to do my best to give you sort of the main ones. One is that, you know, if you imagine that there's a group of schools that are basically selecting for families that tend to have more time and resources, like, those are families that are also going to be able to exert political pressure in their communities to make sure that their schools have, like, a wide range of programs and extracurricular activities and sports offerings. These are also schools that tend to be able to, like, raise more money themselves, right? So they have parent organizations that are raising more money. There are really enormous disparities in PTA fundraising in some cases between screened and unscreened schools. If we think about funding more broadly, like, how does, like, city funding go to screened schools compared to unscreened schools? One sort of interesting quirk in New York City's funding formula is actually that there's a group of screened schools that get slightly more money. Like, they get a little bit of a funding boost under the logic that basically they need a little bit of extra money to like, well-serve accelerated learners and to have kind of programs that will serve students who had been, like, high performers in middle school. It is also true that New York City's funding formula in general is progressive, which means that schools that enroll more high-need students generally get more money per student. So if you enroll more students who did not score proficient on state tests, you get a little bit of a funding boost. If you enroll more students with disabilities, you get a funding boost. If you enroll more English language learners, you get a funding boost. But if you consider that, like, there are a lot of unscreened schools where there's really concentrated need, right? Like, we'd heard a little bit about this already, but, like, if you have a school where, like, a substantial percentage of your population lives in temporary housing, like, that school might be funneling more of their resources toward, like, running a food pantry and partnering with a community organization to provide, like, laundry services on campus for students who don't, like, have access to laundry facilities at home. They're probably devoting more of their resources toward smaller class sizes for students with disabilities. They might be devoting more of their resources to, like, tutoring to help catch students up. Those are all, like, valuable and, like, things that I think a lot of principals of unscreened schools are really proud of. But there's been, like, a long-running debate in New York City about whether that kind of incremental boost that those schools get for their high-need populations is actually enough given the concentrated need at those schools. So even though, like, if you just looked on paper, like, oh, like a lot of the unscreened schools are actually getting more money on a per student basis than screened schools, there are big questions about like whether that boost actually accounts for the like deep need that exists on a lot of those campuses. Another kind of wonky detail that I think is important is New York City, like lots of school districts across the country, saw pretty steep enrollment declines during the pandemic that haven't rebounded. In New York City, the picture's like a little bit complicated because there's been this large influx of migrant students, but that hasn't been enough to make up for those enrollment declines. And if you look at like where a lot of those enrollment declines are concentrated, you will notice that like unscreened schools tend to be some of the city's smallest schools too. And because funding is distributed on a per student basis, right, like the more students you enroll, the more money you get, that is also a huge reason why you have like unscreened schools that just like don't have enough students at them to justify hiring extra staff or justify having like a full array of sports teams or can pay for after school programs. So that's another sort of dimension of the kind of funding inequity.
Mm. Well, I know you just spoke, but I'm actually going to hand the mic back to you for our next segment, Alex.
Yeah, so I know we've been talking a lot about how the admissions process sort of helps produce some of these inequities. In New York City, we have mayoral control of the schools, so we basically have one person right now, Mayor Eric Adams, who really gets to set like education policy. And so I want the three of you to imagine that you are the mayor of New York City. Try to imagine that you're not under indictment for corruption, but imagine you're the mayor of New York City. I want you each to sort of talk a little bit about kind of like what your vision would be and like what are some things that you think the city could be doing to alleviate some of these inequities. And they don't just have to be about like the admissions process, sort of thinking more broadly about like what changes you would want to see.
Yeah, for sure. So if I was the mayor, obviously without the corruption charges, hopefully,
Hopefully.
I would start phasing out screened admissions in New York City high schools. I think the screened admissions process right now is sort of incentivize grouping this like collection of like highly funded and like extremely like prestigious programs in a small set of schools, rather than focusing on creating quality programs in every school so that every student has what they need to succeed. Obviously, I think phasing out screened admissions isn't like the end of be-all solution for the issues that New York City faces, but I think it's a step in the right direction to make sure that no student is limited from opportunity due to their circumstances.
If I were to go on to say that I were the mayor of New York City, I would specifically integrate programs that are that support those in marginalized communities, specifically student-led classes like ethnic studies. My experience with this is that the administration in New York City is very on board with it, but unfortunately it is something that's optional in some schools. In my school it was able to happen, but I know that in other schools teachers might recline from teaching that course, or there might not be enough students on board with that decision. But where I go to school, the ethnic studies course was brought by student-led protests and student activism, which ended up on Chalkbeat News and other news articles. And as a result of that, a group of students decided to commit 4 hours every week to stay after school and develop the course and learn how to approach the topic of race in an ethnically diverse community like Beacon, which is 35% white, but there's that other percentage that has never been taught the concept of race, or probably doesn't know what it is in the context of a school that is predominantly white. So I think having those courses there is really necessary, and now that we have tools like My Schools, these are digital tools that lets us explore what the most recent programs that schools are implementing. And I think this is a really necessary topic because it's contributed a lot to my educational experience. I remember being in junior year and having taken U.S. history and ethnic studies at the same time, and taking those two courses simultaneously allowed me to become a co-facilitator in my senior year. And now I'm teaching my fellow seniors what it's like to explore your racial identity and your cultural identity, and how to take action against rhetoric that very much exists in our world. And I think something the city is doing is implementing those policies, but I think we need a reform that is very concrete.
Yeah, and one thing I just wanted to kind of add to Bernie's experience that for those of you who aren't super familiar with New York City public schools might like fly over your head a little bit is just in terms of curriculum, it has historically been like a little bit of a Wild West where schools just have like an enormous amount of individual autonomy to sort of pick curriculums and sort of see how that plays out. So even though there are sort of some citywide curriculums that are meant to kind of elevate experiences from underrepresented groups, there's like LGBTQ studies curriculum, there's like a Black studies curriculum, but like what Bernie's talking about at his school is like they actually had to sort of in a grassroots way kind of like advocate for a class that would like cover some of those topics. And so I just want to like help you see sort of like how like the policy suggestion Bernie is making is to sort of like do more to make sure that there's more consistency across schools in that respect. And he's kind of working to do that in his individual school.
Yeah, and then so I'll add on as well, like my school has usually been a pretty big like proponent of like all of those like good things, all those different types of classes. But even within those classes, they're not very accessible to like take even if you do have them. Like for example, my school offers AP African American Studies. And the only opportunity you have to take is either junior or senior year. And junior year, you have to take U.S. history unless you have that credit from middle school. So you're left senior year between AP African American Studies or AP U.S. Government and Politics. And almost every student is going to choose AP U.S. Government. I mean, and it's very unfortunate because like you're really like asking students to choose between like this like really essential course that like a lot of people take. It's one of like the core AP classes people take. That's like almost like critical to like understanding like your civic duties as like a citizen of this country and like how like everything works. Over this integral class that teaches things you've probably never like even talked before throughout like much of your educational journey. So I feel like not only like offering the class but also making it like accessible for like more students to take is a big issue as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in a little. We should be teaching our students about race. I think it's something that's coming to light even more with our current administration, and I just hope that New York City makes a commitment to teaching our students about the things that are relevant to them. And speaking of, in high school, I would say one of the things I benefited from was having a very diverse selection of books to read from. I am very fortunate to have gone to a high school that had a robust school library and two wonderful school librarians, Ms. Clemis and Mr. Hetko, shout out, because they were my favorite people in high school. Above my teachers, I would go to Ms. Clemis to talk to her about my day. And it's because I had a school library space that was welcoming, that was inclusive, that had resources that I genuinely needed. And my school library essentially became my safe space, my third space. I make the joke that my school library and my librarians are the reason that I got through junior year because it was extremely stressful. And it's not even that much of a joke because when I was in that space, I genuinely felt that it was for me. And it was a space where I could reset and I could stop for a minute from all of the 7 classes. I'd wake up at 7 a.m., go to school, bam, 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 a bunch of classes, more extracurriculars, and this is a spot where I could just go to be myself. And I think it's a shame that not every student has that opportunity, even though they're supposed to. I'm gonna let you know in a little secret that according to New York State law, every single New York City school, with some bureaucratic exceptions, is supposed to have a school library and a school librarian. But this is not the case. There have been Chalkbeat estimates that this is around 40% of schools have a library and as low as 16% have a librarian. And these are shameful numbers. It's a shame. I feel that my school library was integral to my high school experience and just middle school and elementary school, and I think every student should have that opportunity. And clearly this is something I'm super invested in. So I have had the opportunity to work with the education chair for New York City Council, shout out Rita Joseph and her chief of staff, to work on this issue. But my hope is that everyone recognizes that every student should have a school library and librarian, and that hopefully you leave this room knowing that it does have an impact on students. Even if they don't tell you directly, if they come out of that room smiling, it does have an impact on them. Yeah.
So we're going to deliver on the last thing that our panel description said we would deliver on, which is a debate. In New York State and in lots of states and school districts around the country, cell phone bans have been a particularly hot topic. In New York, the governor has proposed a ban that would sort of allow school districts to come up with their own kind of policies for forbidding internet-enabled devices during the school day. But I wanted to pose it to the three of you as people who have really recent experiences, being in classes, and your schools that kind of have varying policies around this. Give us your hot takes on whether cell phone bans are a good idea.
I'm going to start off strong and bold and say that I think I would like to see some form of a cell phone ban in our schools. Granted, this policy is flexible and takes into account the needs of the school. When I think about some of the classes I took in high school, I remember a room where half of the kids are looking down on their phones. And, I was that kid sometimes. I'm not going to lie. If I think that class is boring, I'm going onto my phone. But I think when I think in retrospect of the educational experience that formed for me, it meant that I didn't feel as engaged in class when I saw the other students were on their phone. I didn't feel as interested to learn. Group work was very hard with a bunch of people who were just on their phones. Can I just say that? And I could see the struggle on my teachers' faces whenever they would ask us to put our phones away and students would still have them. And so I don't think, for the most part, that when a student takes out their phone in class, it's for a reason that's going to positively impact them. And so for that reason and others, I do believe that we should see some implementation of a phone ban.
Yeah, I definitely disagree a lot. There's definitely a little bit of bias there, but I'll explain why. So I actually have a very unique perspective on this, as my school has not only a cell phone ban, but a total technology ban that isn't really working out. It's not really enforced. But anyway, you can't use your phone in the cafeteria, the library, and you can't even have it out in the hallways between classes. If it is seen, it will be confiscated. And on top of that, you can't use an iPad or a tablet or a laptop for notes. It can't even be seen, or that will also be confiscated, which is insane because it's really impeded the educational workflow for a lot of teachers, and a lot of people are pushing back heavily on it, especially as a lot of our classes didn't have a significant issue with cell phone uses. And sort of the big reason why I'm so strongly against banning cell phones completely, having this sort of policy, because it opens the door to more invasive policies, how I mentioned before, banning things that are almost entirely being used for educational purposes. I know barely anyone who's actually using their iPad for other things besides notes. And honestly, if you have the time to pull out Blockbast on your iPad while a teacher is teaching, then it's probably the teacher's fault for not teaching enough content. I don't know. I feel personally, there isn't really the opportunity to use these devices, especially things like iPads or laptops, for non-educational uses in a lot of classes, because you actually want to do well in these classes as well. And it just opens the door to more things for more things to be taken away. If you ban cell phones, the next thing that a lot of those kids that don't care at all will turn to is they're going to start scrolling through TikTok on their laptop instead, for example, and then that's going to get banned next, which is taking away a very useful tool for a lot of people. And it's a lot of people are pushing back against it. And in most cases, regardless, if a phone is being used, you could just take it away. And I guess that is a form of a cell phone ban policy. But I feel instituting it school-wide or even city-wide is very misrepresentative of each individual classroom's needs and the teacher's autonomy.
I think the experiences are really different from a school that has a cell phone ban compared to one that doesn't. Beacon has never had a cell phone ban, and I think that's made our environment a community where we've learned to, take control of ourselves and, take initiative when we're using our phones too much, for example. But I think when it gets to the extent that everybody's using their phone in a class, that's when I think that a restriction should be applied, like the cell phone pouches in the entrance of the classroom where students just put their phones there for the period, but they have it for lunch, for example, or free periods. But I think that has made me into a person that's just relied on my cell phone a lot. I text my friends during lunch saying, "Where are you? Like, are you on floor 7 or the cafeteria?" Like, it's such a convenience for me, and it's become a reliability for me. But I was having a conversation with Salma, I think over a year ago, where we've pretty much disagreed on this topic of having cell phones, because I've considered, my school and some students and some of my friends and myself as being, those screenagers that are always on their phones, and for social media, for research, for anything. I think technology is something that's become so important to us. It allows us to communicate. It allows us to, advocate. The Bell has an Instagram. We use it for promotions, but we also use it to bring change to our community. So I think it can be used in a lot of good ways. But that's my hot take on it.
Well, there's been no yelling or screaming or name calling in this civil debate. We're going to have to end it here, unfortunately. But I just want to pause and reflect a little bit and just point out to you guys that when you ask students for their opinions on the policies that are affecting them, they will give you an opinion. They will tell you a lot of things. And that's something that we have recorded on our podcast, is how are students reacting to the different things that are going on in their school building. And I think student journalism has been a huge part of all of our lives, and has informed the way that we think about our lived experiences. So speaking of that, I want to encourage you all to take your phones out and look up PS Weekly wherever you get your podcasts, so that you can keep listening to student voices, because I think that they have a role in educational policy.
I think we might be at time, but give these guys a round of applause.
PS Weekly is a collaboration between the Bell and Chalkbeat, made possible by generous support from the Pinkerton Foundation, the Summerfield Foundation, FJC, and Hindenburg Systems. Special thanks to the Siegel Family Endowment and our friends at South by Southwest EDU. On this live recorded panel, you heard student reporters Salma Baksh, Marcellino Melika, and Bernie Carmona, along with Alex Zimmerman, a reporter from Chalkbeat New York. Our executive producer for the show is Ave Carrillo. Executive editors are Amy Zimmer and Taylor McGraw. Our engagement editor is Carolina Hidalgo. Additional production and reporting support was provided by Sabrina Duquesne, Mira Gordon, and our friends at Chalkbeat. Music from Blue Dot Sessions. And the jingle you heard at the beginning of this episode was created by the one and only Erica Wong. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.